To House Resolution 5, the bill is considered read. The bill shall be debated for 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the majority leader and minority leader of the respective designees, or their respective designees. The gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock, and the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin, each will control 30 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and to insert extraneous material on H.R. 35.
Without objection.
And I yield myself such time as I may consider.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, one of the great tragedies that came of the Democrats' 4 years of open border policies was the number of fatalities of American citizens and law enforcement officers that were caused by high-speed chases of human and drug smugglers and illegal aliens who poured across our southern border. The Democrats' open border policies incentivized and encouraged these tragedies by creating the conditions that made these deadly high-speed chases commonplace. Just last year, Border Patrol agents in Eagle Pass told us that in the Del Rio sector alone, the cartels were making $32 million every week from human smuggling. That's just one sector of the southwest border. These policies created an enormous incentive that emboldened criminals and cartels and human smugglers and illegal aliens alike. High-speed chases with smugglers occurred almost daily in these border communities, placing both law enforcement officials and innocent Americans in grave danger. For example, last year, criminals led the Texas Department of Public Safety officers on a high-speed chase outside of Del Rio as they attempted to smuggle a half a dozen illegal aliens into the interior of our country. At least one of the smugglers was himself a foreign national from Nicaragua. Amazingly, the Biden-Harris administration rewarded this criminal alien with a work authorization. These criminals also smuggled deadly drugs like fentanyl, which has poisoned thousands of Americans. Roughly 1 month ago in California, a high-speed chase ensued after 2 men had their car referred for secondary inspection at a port of entry. Border Patrol officers ultimately stopped the men and recovered nearly 5 pounds of fentanyl. That's enough to kill more than 100,000 Americans. At the beginning of the last Congress, Cochise County, Arizona Sheriff Mark Daniels, a 38-year veteran of law enforcement, testified before the House Judiciary Committee. Sheriff Daniels told us about a woman named Wanda from his county who was killed while driving to her own 65th birthday party by an individual who was evading law enforcement while smuggling illegal aliens. She'd hoped to enjoy some time at the party with her son, who was receiving treatment for stage 4 cancer. According to Sheriff Daniels, the criminal who caused the crash was smuggling illegal aliens when he fled from law enforcement officers, blew through a red light, and crashed into Wanda's car, cutting it in half and instantly killing her. These dangerous car crashes kill our law enforcement heroes as well. On December 7, 2022, Border Patrol officer Raul Humberto Gonzalez got up, got dressed, and he left for work. His family would never see him again. He was killed later that day in Mission, Texas, doing his job, trying to protect our country. A group of illegal aliens led him on a high-speed chase that ended in a fatal wreck that took his life. Authorities do not have the tools to fully prosecute and punish these criminals. Currently, the failure to yield to a Border Patrol agent or any other law enforcement officer assisting Border Patrol is not explicitly criminalized under federal law. At the same time, there are no specific immigration consequences for foreign nationals, including illegal aliens, who intentionally evade the Border Patrol. In other words, criminals and foreign nationals have little incentive not to evade them. On November 5th, the American people sent a strong message to the world. There is only one pathway into the United States, and that is to obey our laws. And this bill sends a message that we will no longer tolerate those who evade our law enforcement officers who are upholding those laws. H.R. 35 is named in honor and in memory of Agent Gonzalez. It ensures that those who endanger border communities and law enforcement officers by failing to yield to Border Patrol agents will face meaningful consequences, ensuring these illegal aliens can be prosecuted and will be ineligible for immigration relief under our laws. This legislation also provides escalating criminal penalties for if the evasion results in serious bodily injury or death to another person. Now, last session, this bill passed on a bipartisan basis, although 154 of our Democratic colleagues opposed this common sense measure. Taking their cue, Senate Democrats refused to take it up last year. That's inexplicable to me. I don't understand that. But I hope that today, after Democrats have had time to reflect on the matter, especially in light of the decisive verdict of the American people last November, that more of our Democratic colleagues will have seen the light and will join us in protecting the American people from these dangerous criminals and cartels and human smugglers. I want to thank Arizona Representative Juan Ciscomoni for his leadership on this bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I begin with an urgent constitutional public service announcement based on millions of calls and messages that have been flooding Congress. There is a serial constitutional violator at large right now in the District of Columbia, whose overall project to dismantle our Constitution and rule of law is now the target or subject of at least a dozen different federal court temporary restraining orders and preliminary injunctions across the land, and also faces emergency civil actions in dozens of other courts and jurisdictions. The suspect has been described as a very evil individual by Steve Bannon, and has been operating in clandestine fashion with a night crew of computer hacking juvenile associates, one of whom goes by the alias of Big Balls, and another one they call The Kid, who has been known to post racist and anti-Semitic provocations online. The accelerating spree of constitutional offenses alarming the nation involves dozens of episodes of computer fraud and data theft affecting potentially 300 million Americans, and escalating threats against congressionally created federal agencies serving the people, from NIH to the National Weather Service to NOAA to the Department of Justice, public workers, teachers and students, prosecutors of cop-assaulting criminals and seditious conspirators against our government, FBI agents, and anyone who depends on Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, or any other computerized public payment system. The apparent ringleader of all the constitutional mayhem is a reported father of 12, a formerly deportable undocumented immigrant who worked illegally in the country and is apparently part of a loose network of Silicon Valley billionaires who oppose American constitutional democracy and openly favor creation of a monarchical techno-state under their control. The suspect was seen yesterday in the vicinity of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue Northwest and is known to have been consorting as recently as a few days ago with a convicted felon from New York. Described as the richest person in the world, the suspect is both a government contractor with billions of dollars in defense contracts, and we learned yesterday $400 million slated from the State Department for some of his armored Tesla vehicles. And also, he is a part-time government worker whose many taxpayer-supported businesses are being investigated, fined, or sued by numerous federal agencies, including the Department of Transportation, the National Labor Relations Board, the Department of Justice, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and the Securities and Exchange Commission. The suspect has allegedly been working to seize control over several of these same agencies to shut them down, which would presumably terminate all of the relevant threatening investigations. The public has never received from the suspect any ethics disclosure forms required of all federal workers, nor any conflict of interest waiver to resolve his glaring conflicts of interest. The suspect spent his formative years in apartheid South Africa and has been known to post racist and anti-Semitic material and to engage in a Nazi salute in public. Steve Bannon, calls him a truly evil individual. The ringleader and his associates, sometimes called the Muscovites, have been seen by numerous federal workers violating the separation of powers and the spending clause, usurping the powers of this body, trampling the civil service laws, and violating the rights of both his federal and corporate workers. The suspect, his sponsors, and accomplices should be considered dangerous to the constitutional rights, freedoms, and institutions of the people, as well as their property, their jobs, and their livelihoods. If you know anything about the situation and you're a Republican member, please get in touch immediately with the Democrats so we can form a majority to stop this unprecedented attack on the Constitution and American law and order before we end up like apartheid South Africa or Orban's Hungary or Putin's Russia. Now, back to our regularly scheduled program where we avoid the constitutional crisis overtaking the first and greatest multiracial, multi-ethnic constitutional democracy on earth and instead pass completely redundant, unnecessary and sloppily drafted laws that allow us to vote against immigrants, whether documented or undocumented, as Elon Musk was, without either engaging in comprehensive immigration reform or fixing the border. Now, with this bill, House Republicans are once again seeking to take political advantage of a horrific crime by seizing on the death of Agent Gonzalez in the performance of his duties, while doing nothing to make our border more secure or to repair our broken immigration system. And everyone knows, of course, that they blew up the bipartisan border security deal that we had at the end of the last Congress. But H.R. 35 seeks to establish new criminal and immigration penalties on anyone, citizens, permanent residents, documented immigrants or undocumented immigrants, for this offense: fleeing a Border Patrol agent or a law enforcement officer who's working with the Border Patrol. But fleeing Border Patrol at the border already carries substantial criminal and legal penalties under current law. That's already a crime. Under 18 U.S. Code 758, whoever flees or evades a checkpoint operated by the Customs and Border Protection or any other law enforcement agency in a motor vehicle and flees from federal, state, or local law enforcement in excess of the legal speed limit can be charged with and convicted of high-speed flight from an immigration checkpoint. Furthermore, many decades of prosecution and case law make it perfectly clear that fleeing law enforcement is a crime involving moral turpitude for which a conviction will render a non-citizen, whether documented or undocumented, immediately deportable and inadmissible to the country. In other words, what they're dragging us through again is already against the law. So if all of it is already a crime, why do we need another version of it? Except for plainly opportunistic political purposes. And I know those are the only bills they've been bringing forward. They've got no other agenda for the country, and they've handed over the legislative authority of the Congress of the United States to Elon Musk, the fourth branch of government. But in any event, they want us to pass again something that's already against the law. Well, we don't need it. And in fact, this characteristically poorly drafted pile-on bill is so poorly drafted this time that it could subject not just undocumented people, not just permanent residents, but American citizens to prison sentences for conduct that the vast majority of Americans would not even recognize as a crime at all and would not see as a crime. Now, unlike existing federal law or similar state statutes, the bill does not define what it means to flee. In their haste to get this to the floor, they just rushed over that element of the crime, which is of extraordinary interest to every other jurisdiction and even Congress before when dealing with it. But leave that aside, it does not even require evidence of criminal intent, a guilty mind, what lawyers call mens rea, the intention to do the evil thing. In other words, this bill does not require a person to know that they're fleeing Border Patrol in order to be charged with a crime. Now think about it. It applies to citizens, not just non-citizens, And you can be prosecuted and jailed for fleeing from a border patrol that you didn't know was border patrol. This is a radical departure from the prevailing rule in American jurisdictions. For example, in Maryland, I looked up my state, the offense of fleeing or eluding law enforcement requires that a uniformed officer gives a person a visual or audible signal to stop and prominently displays their official badge or other insignia. If an officer is not in uniform, Maryland requires that an officer give a visual or audible signal to stop while in an officially marked police vehicle to establish the necessary mens rea before we put somebody in prison. Under either circumstance, a visual or audible signal can be by hand, voice, emergency light, or siren. It's not only blue states like mine that require evidence that the accused knew what they were doing was wrong before convicting them of purposefully fleeing law enforcement. That's the rule almost everywhere. I'm sure the crime subcommittee chairman, Mr. Biggs, and the sponsor of this bill, Mr. Siscomani, are aware that in Arizona, the offense of unlawful flight from pursuing law enforcement requires proof that the officer's vehicle had markings indicative of an official police vehicle. Evidence that the driver knew that the vehicle was an official law enforcement vehicle, or the defendant must admit knowing that the vehicle was an official police vehicle. In other words, their own state takes the exact painstaking precautions that they just run roughshod over in order to get this bill, which has not had a hearing, to the floor of the United States House of Representatives. And should a defendant choose to exercise their right to trial by jury, the trial judge in Arizona would instruct the jury that they may consider whether the officer operated their emergency lights or siren to determine whether the defendant is guilty of unlawful flight from an actually pursuing vehicle. As was stated in the collaborative reports, Without Intent and Without Intent Revisited, published by the Heritage Foundation, which is adamant about mens rea, and the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, quote, ensuring that an adequate mens rea provision is included in statutes and regulations that create criminal offenses is critical. The Heritage Foundation says it is critical to specify that there must be a culpable or guilty state of mind before we put people behind bars. It appears that nearly every state recognizes this fact when drafting their statutes carefully to address the fears and consequences associated with people fleeing law enforcement. We don't want people going to jail because they were simply moving away from a person they thought was a criminal who turns out to be, for example, an undercover police officer. As a matter of fact, of the states represented by the 32 co-sponsors of this legislation, all but 2 of them specifically require, at minimum, an audible or visual signal to stop the vehicle to prove that there was intentional flight from a pursuing officer. And looking at statutes that address similar conduct in all 50 states, there are only 6 that do not explicitly require an order, direction, request, or signal to stop the vehicle. Despite this widely accepted approach to legislative construction, H.R. 35 would allow Donald Trump's Department of Justice to not only convict non-citizens but citizens of a violation of this so-called offense, and to deport non-citizens without allowing them their day in court and without requiring any evidence of any knowledge that they were actually fleeing a government agent. Without any limiting characteristics under this bill, a citizen could be sent to prison because they did not immediately pull over when hailed by someone, a local undercover officer, for example, assisting Border Patrol. Similarly, in the immigration context, admitting to acts that constitute this nebulous, vague conduct would render a green card holder deportable. Now, the bill applies its criminal and immigration penalties even if the law enforcement officer is in plain clothes and driving an unmarked undercover vehicle. There are a lot of good reasons why a law-abiding citizen or permanent resident might be wary of pulling over for an unmarked vehicle. Just last week, reports emerged of an alarming trend across the country of rapists, criminals, and vigilantes pretending to be immigration enforcement personnel and then targeting people that they thought might be undocumented in order to rape them or assault them or harass them or what have you. I saw on TV a case last night of a sexual assailant who accosted a woman and forcibly assaulted her while pretending to be an ICE agent. I saw that last night. Another man, Sean Michael Johnson, was arrested for impersonating a law enforcement officer along with felony kidnapping, larceny, assault, and battery after he impersonated an ICE agent and stopped a group of men in their car because he told them they were not lawfully present in the country. In this environment, Mr. Speaker, it would be neither unreasonable nor surprising for law-abiding citizens to be wary of pulling over for an unmarked car that claims to be working with Border Patrol. Further, given that the Trump administration is deputizing anyone they can to get to aid immigration enforcement efforts, the number of officers, both in police clothing and in unmarked clothing, to whom this law would apply is staggering. In backing this bill, our colleagues want to impose extraordinary criminal and immigration consequences for not immediately pulling over when an unmarked car driven by a total stranger hails you at a time when criminals, including a pardoned January 6th felon, by the way, are going around impersonating immigration enforcement officers. That is a real trend happening now. And I would love to be convinced it's not, if the gentleman has reason to think that all of these reports and arrests of people impersonating officers are wrong. But this is a trend in the country. And all of this simply to give more power to target immigrants, which already exists, just for the purposes of the legislative show. This is outrageous, and I urge my colleagues to oppose the legislation. I'll reserve at this point, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Maryland reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, my friend argues that this bill is unnecessary because aliens who are convicted of fleeing an immigration checkpoint are already removable. That part's correct. But there's no corresponding grounds for inadmissibility. This bill fixes that omission, and it also expands the law to someone who's deliberately fleeing the Border Patrol, not only from a checkpoint, but from anywhere within 100 miles of the border. But this begs the larger question. If, as the Democrats say, this bill simply restates existing law, well, then why are they opposing it? Well, they say you should prove that the alien knows that they're evading the Border Patrol when they initiate a high-speed chase through a crowded neighborhood. Well, he forgets there are many, many acts that are themselves deadly and dangerous that we sanction. Drunk driving is such an offense. It doesn't matter if you intended to kill somebody when you got behind that wheel drunk. The behavior itself is deadly and dangerous and punishable under law. Leading a high-speed chase through a crowded highway is also such an inherently dangerous act, which my friends on the other side of the aisle, for some inexplicable reason, want to excuse. I'm now pleased to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Klein.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the gentleman, and it's clear that the ranking member of the committee has his talking points today when he wants to complain about a businessman helping the administration to save taxpayer dollars, raising histrionics to a new level by talking about a constitutional crisis. You know, we do have the power of the purse under Article 1, but Article 2, when given that money, has a responsibility for administering it in a responsible manner. And if this administration is going to grant taxpayer funds to irresponsible purposes, or the last administration granted money to irresponsible recipients, then this administration should be able to reconsider those grants or stop those grants from occurring and direct the money into a more appropriate place. But it doesn't surprise me that the gentleman from suburban Washington, who has so many federal employees in his district, is now worried that we are going to have a number of federal employees who are going to be put out of work. You know what? We have too many federal employees in this country. It's about time that we shrunk the size and scope of the federal government, and I think even though it results in people in suburban Washington unfortunately having to seek employment elsewhere, it will save the taxpayers money and improve government efficiency for the long term. I rise to support this bill, the Agent Raul Gonzalez Officer Safety Act, because in recent years, cartels and human smugglers have recruited drivers to transport illegal aliens from the southwest border further into the United States and many of our communities. Unsurprisingly, when encountered by law enforcement and Customs and Border Protection officials, these drivers routinely flee, often at high speeds. Raul Gonzalez was a Border Patrol agent who was killed in 2022 in a high-speed chase while pursuing a car filled with illegal immigrants in Texas. That same year, there were 6 Border Patrol agents who died on the job. High-speed chases put agents, first responders, and innocent bystanders in danger, and because these chases happen as often as daily to multiple times a day, they take up the bulk of the U.S. Marshals' response to calls. So this bill provides a federal criminal penalty for individuals who intentionally evade Border Patrol agents or law enforcement officers assisting Border Patrol, and provide for escalating penalties when evading law enforcement results in serious bodily injury or death. The consequences of the Biden-Harris administration's open borders policies are clear, and now House Republicans, along with President Trump, can ensure the safety of our communities and the security of our borders. I support this bill and encourage my colleagues to do so as well. And with that, I yield back to the gentleman.
The gentleman
from
yields
California.
back. The gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Yes, we have hundreds of thousands of federal employees who live in Maryland, and we're very proud of them. And I assume the distinguished gentleman from Virginia is proud of the hundreds of thousands of federal employees who live and work in Virginia, including in Roanoke. And they have constitutional rights just like other American citizens have. And none of our rights, whether they're constitutional or in the civil service, should be trashed by an unelected billionaire bureaucrat who doesn't understand our system of government. As to the merits, the distinguished gentleman talks about high-speed chases, which is what most statutes talk about in the country. This bill, I don't know if you've read the language, doesn't mention high-speed chases, or it doesn't mention any speed at all. It just says fleeing. It's the only statute I could find in the country that doesn't define what fleeing means. So it's a very sloppy bill that has not had a hearing, that's just brought to the floor for political entertainment purposes. I now yield 6 minutes to the distinguished gentlelady from Washington, who is the ranking member on the Subcommittee on Immigration, Ms. Jayapal.
The gentlewoman from Washington is recognized for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Remember when candidate Trump said that on day one he would end inflation, he would bring prices down for American citizens? That is, in fact, the #1 reason he got elected. But guess what? He has done nothing on this. Republicans have spent no time on the floor trying to bring down prices for average Americans. And in fact, the data that was just released yesterday says that prices have shot up because of many of the proposals that Donald Trump has put forward and the chaos he is inflicting on the economy. Are we spending time on that here on the floor? Nope. We're wasting time on yet another attack on all immigrants, including U.S. citizens. Once again, the majority is moving a bill to expand the Trump administration's mass deportation machine and trample on the core American principle of due process. All of these bills that are being put forward utilize a very simple formula. First, take laws that are already on the books about deporting and making inadmissible to the United States people who are convicted of committing certain crimes and fool the American people into thinking somehow that's not already the law. Second, dangerously expand those laws so that simply being accused of something or admitting to something that no one would reasonably consider being a crime makes it sufficient to now deport you or make you inadmissible without any due process, without a fair day in court. This is terrorizing communities across the country. And Donald Trump's obsession with using every lever of government to target immigrants has undermined our national security and our safety by forcing federal law enforcement officials to abandon fighting drug trafficking or human smuggling and instead focusing on arresting, detaining, and deporting immigrants who pose no threat to public safety and many of whom have lived and worked in this country for decades. Already, we've seen the effects on U.S. citizens with the unlawful detention of U.S. citizens, the targeting of Native Americans, the arrest of countless people with no criminal records. ICE agents are treating the act of speaking Spanish as a probable cause for interrogation. And they are revoking all the crucial and successful legal pathways put in place by the Biden administration, like parole and temporary protected status, including, by the way, for Venezuelans and Cubans who feel Trump's betrayal deeply. This bill follows the same divisive, deceptive formula. H.R. 35 amends the Immigration and Nationality Act to create a new ground of deportability and inadmissibility for any non-citizen who admits fleeing from Border Patrol while operating a motor vehicle, whether or not they knew it was Border Patrol that they were fleeing from. Now, let's be clear. Just as I said with the formula, being convicted of fleeing Border Patrol or any law enforcement already makes a person deportable and admissible. That is current law. But the key word here is convicted. Remember that when we talk about deportability, we're also talking about people who are in the United States lawfully. Many are green card holders and have lived in the United States for decades. So if we're going to deport them, I hope that we would all agree they should have basic due process rights and a day in court, just like any American would want for themselves. That is why conviction is required for deportation. Convictions also mean that law enforcement can focus on the most serious criminals, not those who are simply accused and may well be innocent. Let me also debunk the Republican argument that admitting to fleeing is the same as a conviction. That's simply not true. People may admit to fleeing without even knowing that the person chasing them is Border Patrol. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you're a woman driving alone on a deserted road at night. You hear a siren, you see an unmarked car behind you signaling that you should pull over. You've heard many stories about the men who prey on solo female drivers by pretending to be law enforcement. So you slow down, you put on your hazards, you even call 911 to confirm that they have an officer in the area. They confirm that one of their officers, who's deputized by CBP, is in the area. So you pull over, and when the officer comes up to your window, you say, "I'm sorry, officer, I needed to keep driving while I confirmed that you were with law enforcement since you're in an unmarked car." That constitutes an admission that you were intentionally fleeing law enforcement. And under this bill, even if you're a lawful permanent resident who has been in this country for 10 years or 20 years, you have just rendered yourself deportable. A conviction requirement importantly ensures that you have due process and that you don't miss essential context. Just last week, the Washington Post reported an uptick in people who are impersonating immigration enforcement officers to harass and attack people they suspect of being undocumented. One North Carolina man showed a woman a fake badge and told her that he would deport her if she didn't come to a motel and have sex with him. He ended up being arrested and charged with impersonating law enforcement, kidnapping, second-degree forcible rape, and assault. But in this environment, it is not surprising that people keep driving away when unmarked cars tell them to pull over, claiming to work with Border Patrol. U.S. citizens should also be aware of the fact that the new criminal penalties in this bill would subject U.S. citizens to draconian mandatory minimums for something as minor as failing to immediately stop when hailed by an unmarked police car. And the bill applies to anyone.
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
I can yield the gentlelady another 20 seconds.
Thank you. This bill applies to anyone within 100 miles of the border. That's 2/3 of the population of the United States. Cities like Jacksonville, Charleston, Green Bay, Wisconsin, Grand Forks, North Dakota, and Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. So fear is already pervasive. People are afraid to go to work and schools. Businesses are hurting. Local economies and communities in states from Nebraska to Ohio to Texas are hurting. This bill plays on fear. It's cruel. It's unnecessary. It's dangerous for all Americans' due process rights. Vote no. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from Maryland
Will reserve.
reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the Democrats even listen to themselves. The gentlelady just told us that this bill is simply duplicative of existing law and therefore a farce, and then a moment later tells us that it's a dangerous expansion of existing law. I'd ask them at least to pick one side or the other and stick to it. I now yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Guest.
The gentleman from Mississippi is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 35, legislation named after Agent Raul Gonzalez, a 38-year-old father of two who lost his life in an ATV on the 7th, 2022, as he was attempting to apprehend a group of immigrants who had entered the country illegally. This legislation not only honors the sacrifice of Agent Gonzalez, but it reinforces Republican support to secure our border. This legislation helps fulfill the promise that President Trump made to the American people, a promise to protect those who protect each of us. This legislation will protect American communities by imposing criminal penalties on people who evade U.S. Border Patrol agents or other law enforcement agents at our border. And this legislation will help protect the brave men and women that enforce our border, those who risk their lives for a mission of keeping us safe and providing a secure border for all Americans. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to work alongside President Trump to make our country safe for all American citizens. I am proud to support this legislation, and I urge my colleagues to please vote yes on H.R. 35. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
Reserve.
The gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just an answer to a couple of the recent comments. The good gentleman, the floor manager, says, how could it be possible that this bill is both duplicative and wildly expansive? Well, it's duplicative of the actual criminal offense. That already exists. It's already a crime for somebody at the border to flee in a high-speed chase away from an officer. That's already a crime. What's expansive is this applies to citizens. It goes way beyond the border. It goes all over the country. It doesn't define what it means to flee. It doesn't require a high-speed chase. And it can apply to, as the gentlelady was saying, a woman who hears on the news, the way I heard last night, that there is a maniac out there claiming to be an ICE agent who's attacking women, and she hears about it, and then a plainclothes officer in an unmarked car begins to chase her, and she moves away and, stops 3 or 4 blocks later. She is guilty of violating their sloppily drafted bill. And if they're serious about it, we should go back and have a real hearing, and they should look at what states across the country are doing. We reserve. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to recognize Representative Bynum, who's arrived for 2 minutes.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to oppose H.R. 35. Let's call this bill what it is: fear-mongering dressed up as officer safety. This bill echoes one of the darkest chapters in our nation's history, the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. Just like that shameful law, H.R. 35 forces local authorities and encourages the deputizing of randos to do the federal government's work, punishing them if they refuse. Back then, it was hunting down people who dared to seek freedom. Today, it's forcing local police to become federal enforcers, which is a violation of states' rights. This bill is duplicative of existing law. It threatens members of our community who are here legally and lacks surgical precision needed for solid immigration policy. We need to start focusing on real solutions for the border. I support law enforcement. I support public safety. But I oppose the federal government overreach that erodes local control and threatens civil rights. I urge my colleagues to continue seeking comprehensive immigration policy reform and vote no on H.R. 35. I yield back.
Yields back. The gentleman from Maryland reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. De La Cruz.
The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you to my colleagues for yielding. I rise today in support of H.R. 35, the Agent Raul Gonzalez Officer Safety Act, which I am proud to have co-led with Congressman Ciscomani. Agent Raul Gonzalez was stationed in my community, McAllen, Texas, and was dedicated to protecting the Rio Grande Valley and, quite frankly, all of the nation. In 20 2022, he tragically lost his life while pursuing a car full of illegal immigrants. By passing this legislation, we can take critical steps to protect the safety of law enforcement officers and prevent this tragedy from ever happening again. This bill will make failing to yield to Border Patrol agents or law enforcement a federal crime. Further, if anyone is killed during the apprehension, it could result in life in prison. Criminals will think twice before engaging in dangerous and reckless behavior, like a high-speed chase from Border Patrol agents. Law enforcement put their lives on the line every day to protect our communities. I am committed to protecting those who protect us and urge my colleagues to support this bill in honor of the life and service of a Texas hero, Agent Raul Gonzalez. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
I'm yielding 2 minutes to the distinguished gentlelady from Michigan, Ms. Tlaib.
The gentlewoman from Michigan is recognized for 2 minutes.
Here we go again. We're voting yet on another bill that just promotes racial profiling. That's exactly what's happening, because Americans right now that are brown or black or have an accent, that are American citizens, are carrying passports with them. Why? Because we're going to allow the targeting of communities that look like my district, to police them, to militarize them. You know, this bill strips the right to due process. We already know that. I think that many of my colleagues who are supporting this know that. This is going to target even legal permanent residents. I mean, they're going to separate families instantly without ever allowing anyone to be able to go to trial, to get even a charge or a trial or even a conviction. It is absolutely and clearly unconstitutional. Everyone in our country has rights, and I want my residents to hear me say this again. Everyone has rights no matter their status in the United States of America. But this is what they want, right? They want a racial profile. Make it law of the land, discrimination, law of the land. That's what they want. Again, they want to go back to that kind of militarization and policing of targeting, again, people that look like my mother, that look like my neighbors in the 12th Congressional District. But I want to be very clear, though. What my colleagues don't get, and again, I want my residents to hear me when I say this, is that no president, none, has the power to end constitutional rights, right to due process, not one. This is not, Mr. Speaker, about fixing our immigration system. You know why? Because the donors and the people that support measures like this, the fear-mongering, they want a broken immigration system. Because ranking member probably knows this, they make money off of our broken immigration system. Because if you really wanted to address it, you would get to the core issues of the fact of who's benefiting the most from not allowing our families and our loved ones who have been here for decades and years to be able to have a pathway to citizenship. It's because someone benefits from it. And it's unfortunate. But again,
the gentlewoman's time has expired.
We will have the backs of our immigrant neighbors and even our American citizens that feel like they're being targeted by this law.
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
We reserve.
The gentleman from Maryland reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'd assure the gentlelady that the innocent victims of these high-speed chases come from all races and all backgrounds. I'm now pleased to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Onder.
The gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in strong support of H.R. 35, the Agent Raul Gonzalez Officer Safety Act. This important legislation would make it a crime to evade arrest or detention while operating a motor vehicle within 100 miles of the U.S. border. For aliens, the bill would go a step further, making it a deportable offense to flee from a pursuing Border Patrol agent. Our southern border is under attack, and our Border Patrol agents are on the front lines. The former administration depleted Border Patrol resources, leaving them with an impossible task that routinely puts them in harm's way. The Border Patrol experienced over 5,700 encounters every day in December 2022, the month that Agent Raul Gonzalez was killed while pursuing an illegal alien evading arrest. The following year, the Biden administration doubled down on its open border policies, surging these encounters to 2.5 million in 2023. Under President Biden's leadership, so-called border wall materials were sold off and razor wire was removed. Under President Trump's leadership, we are taking full advantage of our resources to secure the border, and Mexico and Canada have already agreed to bolster enforcement. And already the Trump policies are working. Yesterday, the Washington Times reported that what they called a reverse flow of illegal immigrants streaming back home after being blocked at Trump's border. When migrants learn of the new enhanced security measures at the southern border, they are giving up and going home. Border Patrol agents who previously encountered as many as 10,000 illegal immigrants in a day are seeing fewer than 500. By passing this legislation, we are showing Border Patrol agents that we have their backs and that we prioritize their safety. This bill provides additional protections for Border Patrol agents by imposing harsher penalties for illegal aliens evading arrest at our border. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
We reserve.
The gentleman from Maryland reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to yield 3 minutes to the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan.
I thank the chairman.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the chairman. Democrats for now, 2 weeks have been saying instead of stopping the stupid spending, they attack the guy who's exposing the stupid spending. I think we should maybe get rid of the stupid spending. Trans comic opera in Ireland, Sesame Street on Iraqi television. I think maybe we should focus on that. No. Can't do that. And I think this just underscores the fundamental difference between the left and those of us in the Republican Party, those of us conservatives. The left thinks the bureaucrats are smarter than we the people. Got to trust the bureaucracy. Got to trust you got to trust the experts in the government. I'd rather trust the people. The 77 million people who elected President Trump, who told us he was systematically going to go through these agencies and identify dumb things where taxpayer money is going to. He told us he was going to do it. The American people understood it. He got elected. Now he's carrying out that mission, and they're attacking the guy who's President Trump has put in charge of this effort. The bureaucrats who decided Big Bird and Bert and Ernie on Baghdad TV was a good use of taxpayer money, can't question them, can't do that. Can't question the people in the bureau. Can't question the 108,000 people who work at Treasury. No. They're smarter than the folks President Trump has asked to come in and look at where our tax money is going. Can't question, I think about this. The smartest bureaucrat in the history of the world, Dr. Fauci, the things he told us, we weren't allowed to question him for 2 years, and he ran our lives. And here's the irony. Everything he told us turned out to be false. Told us tell us the virus didn't come from a lab. Yes, it did. We got agencies now that tell us that, confirm that. Told us the vaccinated couldn't get it. Told us the vaccinated couldn't transmit it. He's wrong on both those counts. Told us masks work. Told us 6 feet social distancing was based on science. They just made it up. Here's the kicker. He told us this is the first virus in history where there was no such thing as natural immunity. Can't question him. Got to trust the bureaucracy. I'd prefer to trust the people. Oh, by the way, remember when they tried to set up a bureaucracy in the government that was going to tell us what we were allowed to say? They actually had tried to set up the Disinformation Governance Board as if a bunch of federal bureaucrats could tell us what we can say, what we can't say, what's information, what's disinformation. You got to be kidding me. So I'll trust the guy who was elected by 77 million Americans. I'll trust the Constitution. The executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States. You know why they did that in the Constitution? Because that's the guy who puts his name on a ballot and has to get votes, not the bureaucracy, not the thousands and thousands of people who think they're so much smarter than us regular folks who just get to vote. Trust the guy who was elected and the people he's put in charge of this effort. He told us he was going to do it. The American people elected him to do it. And maybe focus on stopping the stupid spending. After all, we have a $36 trillion debt. Finally, I would just say this. This is a good bill by a good member of our Congress, Mr. Siscomani. We passed it last year. We should pass it again. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California.
I reserve.
Reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Will reserve.
The gentleman from Maryland reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I'm now pleased to yield 5 minutes to the author of this measure, the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Siscomani.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Mr. McClintock, for yielding me time here to talk about this bill. I'm proud to rise in support of my legislation, H.R. 35, the Agent Raul Gonzalez Officer Safety Act. We've heard talk on both sides of the aisle in this place on this bill, on the merits of it, and I am very proud to be supporting this and to actually share a little bit of the story of how we came about this bill. One of my first official meetings that I had after being elected in 22, so this meeting happened in early 23, was to go back to one of my border counties in Cochise. And I asked him, I said, if there's one bill that I could start on immediately, what would it be? And this meeting included law enforcement, local law enforcement, from the state, from the county, also Border Patrol, stakeholders, and the unanimous vote on this, the unanimous feedback was to make sure that something like this never happened again with what happened to Agent Raul Gonzalez. That we dealt with the issue of high-speed chases and the inability of law enforcement to be able to pull over and punish those that are fleeing law enforcement and their failure to yield not being a federal crime. This was it. So to all those on the other side of the aisle here who criticize this bill as saying that it is anti-fill in the blank, this came from the same people that my friends on the other side, Speaker, claim that this is against. This is a bill that came from the feedback of those that are highly impacted by this in our border communities. So it's not only law enforcement that is suffering and actually being risked in this kind of activity, it's innocent bystanders that are hurt by these high-speed chases that are literally dying in border communities and being killed by these pursuits. So the bill is simple. It makes evading law enforcement within 100 miles of the border a federal crime. To me, it's simply common sense that this should be a BP or local law enforcement. You clearly don't have good intentions. That's obvious. Unfortunately, the current law does not make this a crime in and of itself, and it leaves the burden of prosecuting these individuals to our local border communities, as if they don't have some and enough challenges already with what the previous administration cost at the border. Not only is this bill common sense, it's crucial in some cases, even life-saving. To quote one of my constituents, he said, at least once a week, there's a high-speed chase through town that includes a 15-mile-an-hour school zone. Do residents need to die to get the attention needed to correct the border problem? The sad truth is that some have died, both law enforcement and innocent civilians. Law enforcement wants this bill, Mr. Speaker. Mayors in my border districts want this bill. My constituents want this bill. But specifically in the county that I mentioned earlier, Cochise County, the criminal activity is not just reserved to drug cartels or illegal immigrants or smugglers themselves. These cartels are targeting American citizens to be those drivers, and in most cases, those drivers happen to be American citizens as well. So yes, this legislation goes beyond just the illegal immigrants that are driving. It goes to punish also U.S. citizens that are engaging in this activity. Anyone endangering American lives should be held to account. This bill is about supporting our law enforcement communities who deal with this crisis on a daily basis and stop the smuggling and trafficking. In calendar year 2022 and 2023, Cochise County reports booking 2,884 individuals for border-related crimes, costing over $9.4 million to that local community. This is in one county, in one state. I've seen the toll it takes firsthand in our communities. We should be asking ourselves why these people are fleeing law enforcement. The answer is These are bad actors who the cartels and them want to evade law enforcement. Now, finally, I want to highlight the hero that this bill is named after. Agent Raul Gonzalez was killed in 2022 while pursuing illegal immigrants in Texas. His death underscores the tragic truth that our Customs and Border Protection agents and officers risk their lives every day to protect our community. By passing this legislation, we're showing them that we have their backs. That's why this bill is supported by law enforcement groups like the National Border Patrol Council and the National Sheriff's Association and many local law enforcement groups in Arizona as well. This bill, I yield back.
Gentleman yield back. The gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
And we reserve.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
We're prepared to close.
The gentleman is prepared to close. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
And we have no more speakers. We're ready to close.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The distinguished chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Mr. Jordan, invites us to believe that we should just suspend our own interests in legislative power. We should no longer defend the laws we've passed, the programs we've adopted, the money we've appropriated. We should turn it over to the new fourth branch of government, Elon Musk, who can do whatever he wants. And then he wants to also delegate to Mr. Musk our oversight power. We have an entire committee chaired by Mr. Comer. We've got our own subcommittee on oversight in the Judiciary Committee. But do they want to have hearings on Big Bird and Ernie? All of the alleged waste and fraud and abuse that Mr. Musk is finding with his untutored, unvetted, juvenile computer hacker crew? Come on. Let's show some institutional self-respect. This is the Congress of the United States. We're not delegating our power to Elon Musk or anybody else. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, many of our great heroes have understood that sloppy legislation undertaken as part of an attempt to whip up anti-immigration hysteria comes to haunt not just the immigrant community, of course, but citizens too. And this bill is a great example of that, because I don't know if they meant to write it this way, but it applies to citizens. It doesn't require mens rea, so call Heritage Foundation about that. They're opposed to bills like this that don't require you prove that people have a specific intent to violate the law and commit a criminal offense. And it doesn't define what fleeing even means. It doesn't require a high-speed chase, which is what they keep talking about. That's already against the law in lots of places. It's a sloppy bill that's going to come back, if it were ever to become law, which it won't, it's going to come back to haunt us. Thomas Jefferson said during 1798 Alien Sedition Acts, where people were trying to whip up hysteria.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm happy to quote Mr. Jefferson if my friend wants to share any time.
All gentlemen, time having been expired, the gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I first am tempted to address my friend's obsession with Elon Musk. The situation is pretty simple. A new boss takes over, and he brings in an auditor. The auditor calls in the Democrats and says, "I'd like to see your expense account receipts." And the Democrats go absolutely berserk. Now, what does that tell you about what's been going on with our money all this time? My experience has been that the most closely guarded secrets of government are not those that are marked top secret. They're the secrets that are embarrassing. Elon Musk is embarrassing the Democrats, which is why they have unleashed this torrent of invective and vitriol and character assassination upon him, and why they have spent so much time today obsessing on Elon Musk rather than the bill before us to protect the victims of illegal immigration that they themselves unleashed upon our country. Mr. Speaker, Scott Jennings of CNN recently wondered aloud what possesses the Democrats to constantly take the 20% side of every major issue, whether it's waste in government, men competing in girls' sports, crime and homelessness, or in this case, border security. They seem instinctively to reject the common sense position expressed by 80% or more of the electorate and double down on the 20% or less position taken only by the lunatic fringe of the radical left. And so it is again today. High-speed chases due to human and drug smuggling at the border have claimed the lives of far too many Americans, including a Border Patrol agent who was simply trying to protect his local community. This bill, named in his memory, makes it a federal crime to evade the Border Patrol or local law enforcement acting in support of the Border Patrol within 100 miles of the international border. If you are a foreign national, it makes the conviction or admission of such a crime grounds for inadmissibility and removability. And if you endanger our local law enforcement officers or innocent bystanders by initiating a high-speed chase, we will throw you in prison for a long time, and then we will send you packing when you get out. I suspect this bill has the support of well over 80% of the American people, and yet, once again, the Democrats oppose it, and I suspect most will vote against it, as they did last year. Well, the American people have seen this unfold in this chamber time and time again. They clearly understand what's at stake, and they well understand the implications to the sovereignty of our country and to the safety of our communities. Last November, they gave us the votes to pass this legislation, and they gave us a president who will sign it. So let's get on with it. I yield back.
All time for debate has expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 5, the previous question is ordered on the bill. Question is on engrossment and third reading of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to impose criminal and immigration penalties for intentionally fleeing a pursuing federal officer while operating a motor vehicle.
Question is on passage of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
I'd like to ask for the ayes and the nays, please.
Gentleman from Maryland asks for the ayes and nays. The ayes and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the ayes and nays will rise. Sufficient number having risen, the ayes and nays are ordered. Members record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.